What if your biggest fear was something you never considered? You might think that you're afraid of spiders or heights, but what if I told you that an entirely fear could surface under the right circumstances? What are you afraid of when you're home alone in the dark? Is it the darkness itself or what might be hiding in it? Or maybe it's your own imagination, mistaking a shirt on the back of your chair for a stranger in your house. Being afraid is normal, but where do we draw the line between fear and phobia? Fear usually has a justified reason. For example, being afraid of a spider that falls on your face is normal, as well as fearing a snake while walking through a tall grass is perfectly reasonable. However, while fear is the body's natural alarm system, a phobia is like a faulty smoke detector, going off even when there is no fire. It's obsessive and unsupported by any real danger. Phobias are anxiety disorders that inflates the level of distress to extreme proportions and can interfere with everyday life. While fear is often tied to an immediate, understandable threat, phobias can trigger intense reaction to things that are harmless or even non-existent. Why is that? To understand how phobias work, you first need to comprehend how fear is structured in human brains. The fear response starts in the brain's amygdala, a pair of almond-sized nerve bundles that alert other areas of the brain to prepare for defensive action. Next, the hypothalamus relays the signal, triggering what we call stress response in our bodies. Our breathing and heart rate increase, and our blood pressure rise. Areas in the brainstem activate, putting us in a state of high alertness. This is known as the fight or flight response. The pupils delay to catch more light and the muscle tense up, including those that raise the hairs, causing your hair to stand on end. By the way, when your mouth feels dry before a performance, it's all the same reaction. But not everyone knows that in fight or flight response there is also a third option: freeze. In nature, this option can save a life. This is an antelope. A predator has caught it and it pretends to be dead. But as soon as the predator gets distracted, it immediately exits the freeze mode and runs away. This is also why some antelopes seem frozen in place when a car approaches. It's a primal instinct kicking in, hoping that by blending into the environment, they might escape the danger. At the same time that the amygdala fires up, the cerebral cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and judgment, shuts down. This can make it challenging for us to make good decisions when we're faced with fearful and stressful situations. But it's a big oversimplification to think that fear only lives in the small amygdala. Not all fears are created equal. Our brain uses two different paths to process fear responses. One for immediate danger and one for context. For example, you're walking through the woods and catch a glimpse of a long, narrow shape underfoot. The short road bypasses the cerebral cortex. The signal goes straight from your eyes to the thalamus, the sorter of your sense, and directly to the amygdala. The result? An immediate reaction. It's the same instinct that makes you want to run away when you see the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. Your brain doesn't want to analyze it. It just says, get out of there. This quick route explains why your heart sinks, a chill runs down your spine, and your body mobilizes in mere milliseconds. This is exactly why horror movie jump scares exploit.
I can still hear that voice.
What?
But there is also long road, where context plays a crucial role. It's all about what's happening around you and the potential threats. The long road goes through the cerebral cortex, where full analysis takes place. The brain compares what it sees with everything stored in memory and makes a judgment. Is it a dangerous snake or just a garden hose? Think of these two situations, a lion in the zoo and a lion in the savannah. The trigger is the same, a lion, but the context is different. In the zoo, your brain recognizes the thick cage bars and decides there is no threat, so your pulse stays calm. In the wild, however, the lion could attack you, so your brain triggers adrenaline, activating both the short and long fear responses at the same time. But why does the short road even exist? It allows your body to react instantly, just like warming up your car on a winter morning. If the long road confirms the threat, your body is already primed, muscles full of blood, ready to hit gas and reach peak performance. Just like when a cat is ready to flee and once it understands what's happening, it takes off immediately. After all, mistaking a hose for a snake is far less serious than mistaking a snake for a hose, right? It's better to jump a million times at a harmless hose than to miss a real danger of a real snake. The brain is master at playing it safe. This is how a normal, healthy fear operates. But for people with phobias, the brain isn't just cautious. It acts like a crazy dog, barking at everything it sees behind the fence. Someone with phobia experiences anxiety constantly in the background, and the moment something even remotely resembles a threat, like this mouse, the brain immediately wants to run away. What do you think? Is the fear hardwired into us from birth? A study was conducted where they showed infants images of snakes mixed with flowers and fish while tracking their pupil dilation. Remember, pupils dilate when we sense danger. So when the baby saw snakes and spiders, their pupils dilated as well. However, they didn't show any signs of fear or cry. In other experiments, children even played calmly with snakes. It turns out that while babies are inclined to notice snakes and spiders from birth, the actual fear develops later. Also, to prove this, after observing the events of 9/11, 43% of Americans developed a fear of flying, and even 20 years later, 26% still harbor that fear. However, it's an irrational fear, because the likelihood of dying in a car accident is far higher than an airplane. Some Americans are still afraid of skyscrapers as well. In 2021, this many people were still anxious about tall buildings. The media operates by the rule if it bleeds, it leads, meaning that the more shocking and violent the content, the more views it will attract. But what can help people with phobias? But even though we are born with a natural capacity for fear, learning to think differently is where therapy comes in. And some of the foundational ideas for behavioral therapy comes from dog and a little boy. Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov discovered that if a dog heard a bell each time it was fed, it would start salivating at the sound of the bell alone, even if there was no food. This demonstrated what's called a conditional reflex, something learned rather than inborn. Other researchers thought, what if phobias could form in the same way? Could someone learn to be afraid of something harmless, just as Pavlov's dogs learned to associate a bell with food? A rather cynical experiment tested this idea. A 9-month-old baby named Little Albert had no natural fears, except for loud noises. Researchers showed him a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, and even fire. Each time Albert showed no fear, but then, just before showing him these animals again, the researchers struck a metal bar with a hammer. The loud crash scared Albert into crying immediately. Eventually, even the sign of the white rat alone would make him cry, having associated it with a terrifying sound. You see, they created a conditional reflex, and as a result, Albert developed phobias of rats, fur coats, Santa Claus mask, and even his beloved pet dog. It's shocking, right? But the laws of 1990s allowed such experiments on people. Unfortunately, Albert's mother took him out of the experiment too early, and the researchers couldn't carry out the reverse process to eliminate the phobia. Wait, was that even possible? Yes. If dogs stop being fed when the bell rings, then over time their salivation at the sound will disappear. The reflex will extinguish. The same goes for phobias. If during the personal contact with the trigger there is no life-threatening danger, then phobia can extinguish after such sessions. This is a principle behind a method called exposure therapy, where you're gradually brought face to face with the trigger of your phobia. For example, if you have claustrophobia, you might be offered a bag over your head. Yes, you can take the bag off, and it's not a cramped closet, but that's just the first stage of exposure. Fear is gradually dismantled, but sometimes just one face-to-face encounter with your fear is enough. This is called floating. This girl has a panic fear of snakes. She can't even watch them calmly on TV. Look at how the session starts. This is a snake, and this is the fear of snakes. But once she overcomes herself and holds the snake, here's what she says.
I can't believe it. I'm not completely comfortable,
No,
but...
it's okay, it's okay. Okay.
The fear is gone because this creature posed no real threat. But what if the trigger is difficult to recreate in a clinical setting? For example, with virtual reality, you can find yourself on a bridge if you need to overcome a fear of heights, or on the road if you have a fear of driving, or in a meeting if you have a social phobia. The doctor will adjust the intensity of the trigger and give you advice on how to calm yourself. You can do everything gradually. In the first level of simulation, a spider is in a jar, and in the second level, the spider is on the table. But sometimes the fear is just so powerful that the exposure therapy can't be conducted, and then beta blockers come to the rescue. These pills rewrite your memories by preventing emotions from reigniting the neural pathways to negative memories. Within a day, you'll feel much more comfortable. After all, a phobia is essentially a non-productive way of thinking, a bad habit of our brain that can be reprogrammed. The world has a ton of different phobias, and they seem unrelated, in the way that people just fear about anything. Most things in your room are feared by just about thousands of people in the world, and they are horrified by things you might just be playing with. So are these phobias different in nature? In the 1990s, psychologist Stephen Race sought to identify humanity's primary fears, which he named fundamental fears. According to Race, this should be innate and serve as roots for all other fears. He proposed a list of fears: fear of physical harm, fear of negative evaluation, and fear of anxiety itself. However, other psychologists disagreed, noting that feeling of anxiety, like increased heart rate and breathing, don't frighten us from birth. What scares us are life situations associated with anxiety, such as public speaking. We only become familiar with them through experience. The fear of negative evaluation is not an innate fear. To fear it, one must first learn social norms during upbringing. To panic at the thought of cuts or burns, one must have experienced them at least once or seen them in a movie. However, one fear does seem to fit all these criteria. Liminal spaces. Look at these photos. Spacious, empty areas like shopping malls, fast food restaurants, hallways, pools, and even ordinary doorways. There is nothing scary about them. Yet, we still feel uneasy. The explanation lies in the very name. Liminal means transitional. We all fear transitional events in our lives. Some fear job changes, moving, divorce, marriage, surgery, or death, because the future is unclear. Just like many places around us have a transitional character, these spaces are not meant for people to stay long. They're designed for passing through. Remove the flow of people, and the places instantly lose their liveliness, leading you to question why no one is there, why everything feels so lifeless, and who is hiding in that space. Perhaps it's a pause before a boss fight, which causes us discomfort and even fear. Therefore, liminal spaces have long been used in horror films. The empty hotel in The Shining, the empty pool in It, and the deserted town in Silent Hill. A short film about the lights going out makes you fear hallways. The unknown triggers many phobias, and it even has a name, agnosophobia, or the fear of the unknown. Simply put, this is a fundamental fear that we all experience. This was confirmed through a simple experiment where participants were connected to electrodes that delivered a harmless but painful shock. In one experiment, the shock was delivered with a 50% probability, and in another, it was delivered 100% of the time. Surprisingly, when the chance of shock was 50%, the stress level was much higher than when the shock was delivered every time. Many phobias can also be traced back to the fear of the unknown, such as the fear of darkness or nyctophobia. Darkness itself isn't the cause of a danger, but is a habitat of the unknown, which is frightening. From an evolutionary perspective, it's advantageous for us to remain in familiar places, where the fire is, where the comfort is, where the kin are. The fear of the unknown developed to ensure that we were cautious about entering potential dangerous new environments. Now I hope that you feel a bit calmer, knowing that you're not alone fearing the dark or a closed door behind which no one is present. In fact, this is a basic fear we all shared, including myself. Thanks.